Hello everybody, welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about near-death experiences. They can be exciting, fascinating, intriguing, and will often activate a belief in something bigger, such as a brighter existence of being with a higher power, or aka God. I will also tell you about the very first spirit I ever saw in my life. It was a special spirit that had a very important gift for me. If you have looked into this before, you already know about the peace, the beauty, the sense of being well taken care of, and the two most talked about factors, the light and the tunnel. I'm going to share 3 different near-death experiences, including my own. My experience channeled the path of my life in a completely different direction. Of the 3, I am the only one that did not see the light and the tunnel. I will tell you, and you will see as you listen to my story. If I had gotten that far, I would 100% not be here today. As you may have heard, you have a choice and are able to choose whether you will stay or go back into your life. Yeah, should I stay or should I go? I would have stayed. I recently went to a family dinner at my son's house. We all sat around a very long table. My son, the grandkids, the mother of my grandkids, her mother, and her husband, Chuck. Chuck is a very kind, soft-spoken guy who Jack and I really admire and have been very fond of ever since we met him back in 1998. As with any dinner party, the conversation was all over the place, but taking the forefront was a discussion of an upcoming fishing trip to Alaska. There was talk about great recipes for the anticipated salmon, and of course, the annual request for less salmon this year and more halibut. Suddenly, my ears perked up. For some reason, Chuck started talking about his near-death experience. Wow, I said to myself, I think this dinner party just got more interesting. The look on his face was unbelievable. He was glowing and very excited to share his story. Chuck's energy became very fresh, and he looked much younger as he spoke. Chuck's story about his temporary journey to the other side happened in 1953 when he was just 9 years old. At that time, he lived in the northwest area of Washington State. It was crazy. As Chuck told his story, it had the energy of something that had happened just yesterday. When Chuck was a young boy, he was always very sick and had been ill with pneumonia numerous times. Every time he had pneumonia, it was very scary and threatening for his parents. During this time, Chuck's temperature was extremely high. He was lying on the couch with his mother by his side. He'd become very weak and unable to speak. Chuck and his parents were waiting for the doctor to get to their house. They lived in Roche Harbor in the San Juan Islands, and there were no hospitals. All at once, Chuck found himself looking down on his body. He saw his mother sitting next to him. She was reading a book. Suddenly, Chuck found himself surrounded by the most incredibly warm light. There were people all around him, dressed in white, offering love and support. Chuck told me the comfort he felt was very hard to describe because there were no words which accurately represent this kind of peaceful feeling. The intensity of the light grew larger as the people who surrounded him began to move apart. They were making way for an even brighter light. It was a being who had a very important question for Chuck. Do you want to stay or do you want to go back? Chuck remembered very clearly as the question was being asked. His lips did not move. However, Chuck was able to hear him, every word of the question, very clearly. This was obviously some kind of mental communication. Chuck's choice was to go back, and he did. To this day, Chuck feels he had been touched by the power of God, and his faith has stayed strong. This experience created an amazing healing. His health dramatically improved. He was never seriously sick again. Now, the part that's very common with people who have had near-death experiences, they don't share their experience. Even in my own story, I didn't want to tell anyone right away. I don't know if we're afraid others will not believe us, or maybe we're not sure we believe it ourselves. With Chuck, it was a very long time before he shared his story for the first time. It was in the mid-80s, and his mother laid on her deathbed. She was still conscious, but with only a few hours left of her life. He told her in great detail his story and what she had to look forward to. He encouraged her to embrace her transition. There was a calm sense of ease that filled the room. His mother quietly passed a few hours later. A few months before the dinner party that I spoke of earlier, Chuck had sadly lost his youngest son. We discussed the fact that if you have had a near-death experience, when you do lose someone, it's a gift to have the knowledge of being able to know exactly where they are, the peace, the love, and the pure joy that they are now experiencing. Now, this is my near-death experience. It changed my life in a number of ways. If you've watched any or all of my previous videos, you will know that I have cleared auras, balanced chakras, channeled messages from the other side, and gave examples of seeing and communicating with spirits. In the mid-70s, I moved to Boulder, Colorado with my family from Lexington, Kentucky. Being eager to get involved with activities and make friends, I joined a volleyball program and, unfortunately, a softball team. It was a Sunday morning and my new softball team was having a practice. I was playing first base. The ball was thrown to me, and in my recollection, I weirdly just stood there and stared at the ball. For some reason, I didn't put up my glove. I didn't even try to catch the ball. I was wearing a pair of sunglasses, and the ball crashed into them. All of the shattered glass went into my left eye. Of course, the coach came running to my assistance. He immediately started taking me to his car and then on to the hospital. At this time, oddly enough, I did not lose my sense of humor, and I said to the coach, "Well, you did tell me to keep my eye on the ball." We arrived at the hospital, and an eye surgeon promptly arrived on the scene. He examined my eye and said, "We're going straight to surgery." What followed were the normal preparations for surgery, and I was taken straight into the operating room. The next thing I knew, I was up in the corner of the operating room watching the doctors performing the surgery on my eye. I saw my body on the table. There was a sheet with a hole where they were working on my eye. The lead surgeon said to his assistant, "It's a lot worse than what we thought." After hearing that, the first thing that went through my mind was, I don't want to be there. I like it here. I'm staying here. I no sooner finished that thought when my heart stopped. Everything went into a well-organized panic. I heard someone say, "We lost her." The sheet was pulled off, and I saw them come in with the paddles. As they were working on my heart, the last thing I remember was someone yelling at me. Whoever it was leaned in over me. It felt like she was right in my face, and in a very loud voice yelled, "Don't you do this to us. Don't you do this to us. You get back here." Next thing I knew, I was waking up in the recovery room. The surgeon came in a really kind, compassionate, caring voice, said, "Linda, I need to talk to you. I need to ask you a question. Have you ever had any heart problems?" I said, No, I have not." He said very seriously, "Well, I need to tell you what happened in the operating room." I said, "Oh, Dr. G, I know what happened in the operating room." I proceeded to describe in detail exactly what was said, how the heart incident was handled. Now, this is the weird part. Out of the blue, I said to him, "What was your wife doing in the operating room?" He said, "My wife?" I said, "Yes, the woman with the dark curly hair." I just could not believe what I just said. I thought to myself, how did I know his wife was in the operating room? My knowingness was something that was easy to describe, but hard to understand. It's like I knew things. I didn't have to say, "Oh, look at that woman." It was like I didn't even look at her. I just knew who she was and what was coming down. I didn't have to think about it at all. The information was all there. I didn't have to ask any questions. The next 6 weeks were incredibly difficult. I was confined to my bed with a very fragile eye. It was blood red and had black stitches running down the center. I could have easily been in a horror movie. In my entire life of 29 years, I had never understood why anyone would consider taking their own life. But I was so very depressed and had a new understanding of the power of depression and the hold it can have on one's mind. At the end of the 6 weeks, I met with a cornea specialist and was told I needed a transplant. I was excited to hear that and wanted to have the surgery as soon as possible. I knew I would get rid of that monster eye, and that sounded good to me. His response wasn't what I wanted to hear. The specialist explained to me that my eye was still very fragile and hadn't yet stabilized. In fact, this type of surgery wouldn't normally be performed anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, not 6 weeks. Not to mention, it had never been done before and would be considered as exploratory. I would have to sign release forms and be cleared by a psychiatrist before the surgery. My response was, "Okay, I'm in." He agreed to do the transplant as soon as possible. I was sent home and told that I would be contacted as soon as a donor cornea was acquired. I thought it would be a long wait, but the call came shortly after I arrived home. A cornea had been located and was to be flown to Denver that night. I was to get back in the car, get back to the hospital. Surgery was going to be performed first thing in the morning. The groundbreaking surgery took place early in the morning as promised. Now, if you remember, my eye was blood red with black stitches down the center. As I woke up from the surgery, the bandages were being taken off. My left eye looked just like my right. It was wild. The doctors went crazy. They were high-fiving and seeming to be jumping around the room. Well, they were all professionals, so I'm pretty sure they weren't actually jumping, but boy, were they ever happy, to say the least. My eye was examined, and the doctors felt that I would be able to see in as little as 3 days. Sadly, I never saw out of that eye again. I am blind in my left eye to this day. The surgeons were still happy because they were only doing the cornea, which is the outer layer of the eye, like a windshield. It was decided that there must be some damage deeper into my eye, but it was never determined exactly what or where. Strange fact, during the examination and the surgeries, no glass was ever found embedded in my eye. Now let's talk about a spirit with a gift. The evening before my appointment with the specialist, I woke up in the middle of the night. There was a young boy standing at the bottom of my bed. He looked like he was about age 12. He had on beige pajamas with maroon blocks. I stared at him for a minute, and then he just disappeared. I thought it was a dream. After the surgery, I asked the doctors if they could tell me any information about my donor. They said, the only thing we can tell you is that your cornea came from Dallas. I asked them if I guessed, could they tell me if I was right? The doctors kind of laughed and looked at each other and said, sure, why not? I asked them if it was a boy aged 12. They looked at each other with shocked looks on their faces and replied almost quietly, yes. The surgeon told me that my cornea transplant would probably be the first of many until they found one that my body would not reject. I only had one transplant, and I never needed another. Before I tell you the last story, I'd like to tell you about my family. I'm the oldest of 10. Sadly, we have lost 2 of our sisters. One a number of years ago to lung cancer, and another recently died of COVID-19. It was very scary and shocking. My family has always been very loving, caring, connected, funny, crazy, and playful. We're loud, irreverent, and we laugh at everything and anything. A few years ago, my oldest brother Rick was having a heart problem and went into the ER. While there, surrounded by his medical team, trying to decide what to do, Rick had a near-death experience. Yes, he felt the immense love, the peace, the joy, the contentment. Yes, he saw the beautiful white light, and yes, he walked into the tunnel. As expected, he was asked the question about staying there or going back to his life on Earth. He chose to go back, and after he got back, he couldn't wait to tell me his surprisingly wonderful story. As my brother shared the details, I sat there smiling and nodding. He kept saying, "No, Linda, you don't understand." I just kept smiling and nodding. Rick continued on about his emotions and how he felt there, and said about 3 more times, "You don't understand. I don't think you believe what it was like." Finally, I said, "Rick, who you talking to, brother? You know that I've been into these kind of things for years. Besides, Rick, remember, you know the story. I almost died on the operating table." After a long pause, he said, "Yeah, but I thought you were nuts." Thank you so much for listening today. This is Linda Kennoy wishing you peace, love, contentment in this realm of reality. Thumbs up would be great. And of course, I want you to subscribe.